I've written lots of slides and written a few notes, but I've not rehearsed it like Brad luckily did. So forgive me if I'm a bit shaky. So a bit about my background. I trained as a graphic designer in the late 90s, I think, 95, 96, 97, something like that. I worked in magazine trade for a few years, designing car magazines and truck magazines and really boring things, unless you're into cars or trucks. I'm self-taught full stack developer, so after learning about graphic design, I went in and started learning about code and specialised in e-commerce initially, and then I ran my own business for 10 years prior to coming here, and I specialised in building systems for people. So I'd go into a business, I'd learn about how they operated, what they did, and essentially build them a system that made their business more efficient, and try and essentially collect lots of systems into one to make their data transition a lot easier. So I started out my Agile career here at DPRG, since January, I think it was, wasn't it? So prior to that, I was a developer here for a year. Again, full stack, so I was mainly doing JavaScript and PHP. And most people that know me know that I like learning lots of things. Anyone get that reference? You will, because you're old. Yeah, Johnny Five. Yeah. No, I dare you. So what we'll cover, we'll have a quick look at the history of Agile. We'll review the manifesto, which is kind of the governing document essentially. We'll look at other kind of management techniques like waterfall and versus Agile, and why one is better than the other in certain circumstances. And then we'll look at what is Agile, primarily looking at Agile teams, MVPs, minimum viable products, risk management, and then focusing on the features. And then common Agile artifacts, so stories, story pointing, value pointing, stand-up cycles, sprints, and things like that. And then we'll take some questions at the end if anyone has any. So, the history of Agile. So the idea of kind of Agile working was coming into fruition in the early 90s. 91 was when Scrum was developed. The first Scrum guide was developed, and throughout the 90s, people were using it quite a lot and kind of formulating ways of working and building all these kind of different frameworks to help businesses kind of transform. A lot of it came from the manufacturing industry, and Toyota especially. They're huge in. They invented Kanban as an example, if you're familiar with that. They pretty much drove lean business management or project management, and so they've really invested a lot of time and effort into kind of producing a better workflow for their business, and a lot of it's essentially a production line. So what we generally do is a bit of a production line. I don't know why some things are disappearing, so forgive me for that. I don't know why. In 2001, there were 17 developers and kind of leaders, which you can't see. That's about there. That got together in America in a ski lodge, and they kind of hashed some ideas together and tried to come up and formulate this idea that a bit of a guide essentially, and a kind of essentially it turned out to be the Agile Manifesto. So there were representatives there from extreme programming, which is a kind of a form of working Agile essentially, Scrum, DSM, adaptive software development, Crystal Clear, Crystal Red, and then feature-driven development. So loads of different people from different kind of backgrounds coming together, and they had different ideas, and essentially just coming together and working on this document. So they essentially standardized their thoughts and came up with the Agile Manifesto, and there were 12 principles, and they're essentially guidelines to help teams work in an agile way. So as an overview, this is essentially ripped off from their website. So they say, we are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we have come to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. That is, while the value of the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. So it's not to say that any part of this is null and void with Agile. The whole process is needed, but the emphasis is more on the points on the left. So individuals and interactions is talking to people face to face, stand-up meetings, etc. Having that kind of those moments when you're talking to each other rather than sharing stuff on Slack and things like that. It's equally got its benefit, but it's primarily trying to get people talking together and working through problems essentially. And these are the 17 guys at the bottom that were present at the signing of the manifesto. There's some big names there in kind of this industry. Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland, they're the guys that invented Scrum. Kent Beck, I can't remember which he produced, but they're all kind of big names. The vast majority are quite big names. If you do any kind of research into Agile, you'll pick a lot of this up, and their names are kind of very, very recurring, and they're very good at what they do essentially. So if we review the manifesto, we'll go through the 12 points. So the first one, our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. What I was going to do with this talk, I was going to read through all the points and then go through each one and then describe how certain frameworks fit into that. But I'm not going to do that. So we'll go through the points and then I'll go through the other kind of aspects of it. But essentially, if you can try and take the principles behind these and understand why they're beneficial in the way we work. Welcome changing requirements even late in development. Agile processes harness change for the customers of a competitive advantage. Deliver working software frequently from a couple of weeks to a couple of months with a preference on the shortest time scale. Business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. Build projects around motivated individuals, give them the environment and support they need, and the trust them to get the job done. The most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. Working software is a primary measure of progress. Agile processes promote sustainable development. The sponsor, developers, and users should be able to maintain a consistent pace indefinitely. Continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility. Simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, is essential. The best architecture's requirements and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. At regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more efficient, then tune and adjust its behavior accordingly. So if you're familiar with any kind of Agile framework, Scrum or Kanban, or any of the others, then a lot of those will probably make a lot of sense to you, especially the last one if you're used to kind of retrospectives and those kind of conversations. So if we have a look at commonly before Agile kind of workflows came into place, a lot of development companies and software houses used to go down the waterfall route. And I'll briefly touch on what waterfall is, but essentially the two kind of methodologies lean towards one's when you've got a project that's very predictable, one's when you've got something very uncertain. So Agile is when it's in play and really useful when you've got working on something that's uncertain. So any kind of development, you've got no idea really how you're building it, what you're doing until you actually start writing some code essentially. With waterfall, it's very linear. You can say you need to do this by this date, but when you kind of estimate that kind of stuff in code, it's almost impossible to do. So what is waterfall? You may or may not have seen kind of a Gantt chart. So this is a Gantt chart. Oh no, it's not. Spoiler alert. So, come on, you bugger. Okay, this is a Gantt chart essentially. You've got a list of tasks and you're saying, okay, this task can take this long, this task can take this long. The problem with this approach, say task 4 takes twice as long as you thought it was, it throws the rest of the plan out. Generally with these kind of projects, a lot of the kind of planning and attention to detail is done right at the very beginning of the project. So you end up having planning out exactly how you're going to build it. It could be a year-long project. It might take 3 months to kind of plan that out, figure out exactly how you're going to build it, what the structure is. So it can take a long time to plan those things. Then you've got to deliver it. And during that time, that year-long project, all the kind of ideas could have changed for the business that you're trying to, or the problem you're trying to solve. So it's not very reactive at all. You're really stuck to this kind of rigid line of, we haven't done this. In these kind of processes where the client's not seeing anything. Where waterfall is very good is when you're building a house. You know you're going to build your 4 walls. You know you're going to make them out of brick. You can say I can lay 100 bricks a day, and then you can figure out how long it's going to take, and you can schedule that in. Same goes with the roof and things. So it's very, very good at very predictable things. But Agile kind of is much better for development. So if we look through a few of the kind of key components of Agile, the first one being Agile teams. Normally in a lot of, spoiler alert again, it's got a lag on this.
StackChat, mate.
Yeah, okay, wrong one. Okay, so typical kind of structure of a lot of businesses and non-agile businesses, you've got a management board at the top or a single manager at the top, a layer of kind of managers in the middle, and then generally, this is a bit of most of the people that are actually adding value to the business, they're actually doing the work, that actually produce an end product, are essentially at the bottom. So you end up having decisions being passed down the top, policies, budgets and things like that, deadlines, and it's very much on a need-to-know basis. And the people at the bottom, we don't really know what's going on at the top, where the decisions are coming from. On the other side, the kind of people doing the work at the bottom then send up things like reports, so that goes to the management layer and ends up at the top. So there's a massive kind of distance between the leaders at the top that are kind of driving the business forward and the people at the bottom. The communication generally breaks down, you get to any kind of scale, any kind of size. So the normal solution is to add more people in the middle, into the management layer, and they end up not necessarily causing problems, but it kind of, the communication gets even harder, and trying to have that kind of balance is pretty difficult essentially. So what Agile does, let me just quickly go back to that one point. Sorry, my slide. So commonly, what you have at the bottom as well, and the value layer essentially, is okay. We'll get there. I'm glad nobody's recording this. So commonly, what you'll have down here is people either in silos. So similarly, you can have a JavaScript team, a PHP team, whatever kind of teams are needed, and the work generally goes through that flow, and there's lots of barriers with that essentially. So every time you try and get some work through a certain department, there's red tape involved, but they're all specialists in their own right essentially. With the Agile kind of setup, teams are made up from the people that need to produce a project. So if your project's a website, as an example, your team would be made up from a front-end designer, a front-end coder, a JavaScripter, a PHP guy, whatever kind of software you use. They're then responsible for producing that product. They're given that project and say, you go and do it. You make the decisions. We'll basically support you. So the management then get intermingled with these people, and they support them. And the teams, the guys are actually adding the value, are essentially at the top of the chain. They're the ones that are doing the valuable work, and the management layer then helps support them. And it's called servant leadership essentially. What can I do to make your life easier? Then rather than having the board, we can still have that kind of decision-making process, but the communication is between the two is much less. The management board as well need to be supporting the developers and the team, the Agile teams, and the management. So the management would generally support the managers in between the teams, and the managers will support the teams, and then it's a really kind of nice flow. And you can break these teams up into, as we've got here, a database, experts, I suppose, front-end, mobile, whatever it might be. So ideally, these teams are responsible for producing that project. So rather than having the silos, you've reduced all that, and you just have a team that can produce a job. So you say, you give them a job, and you're off. So minimal viable product. Adolf recognised this slide. So one of the ideas, one of the points on the Agile Manifesto is to kind of deliver early as possible. So by doing that, you're getting a product to market as soon as possible. You can get it in the user's hands. You could be making money from it, but essentially you're testing it in front of the user. And you're actually learning what the users actually want, and you're getting feedback constantly, and you're constantly evolving. Doesn't mean there's no end to the project, and it's constantly running and running and running. You can kind of plan things out so there's an end, but essentially if you can target a project to have a minimal viable product, so you can do X, Y, and Z, out of all the feature sets, get a couple of features that you could say, okay, that's a working product. get that out as soon as you possibly can, and then you can start gaining feedback. So the idea behind it is, imagine this is you, this is the problem you're trying to solve. It could be a website that's potentially making money, a certain feature, but essentially the other side of it, you don't know whether it's going to make you any money, and you don't know whether it's going to, you could crash and burn, or you can make a fortune from it essentially. So a lot of people, they'll go straight to building a set of escalators. Perfect, beautiful, takes 6 months to build. It's a wonderful set of escalators, does exactly what you need to do to get to the top and have a look over the other side, see if it's even profitable. But you could get a ladder and you could just go over the top, much cheaper, much quicker to produce. If it turns out to be beneficial, then you start building escalators, or you could even build a stack of cardboard boxes to get over the top. So it's all about kind of thinking about how you can minimise the amount of effort to essentially see whether things are going to work out or not. Because I know, we've done a lot of projects upstairs that companies have sunk a lot of money into, and they don't even know they're going to work or not. They've probably not even done the market research, to be perfectly honest. So Agile is incremental. The better way to do it is at the bottom. Start with a skateboard and work up to a car rather than trying to build the car. You've got each one of these processes, you learn so much. You get into the client's hands again, or the customer's hands, or the user's hands, and you're learning what they actually want, and it's constant adjustment rather than presuming you know what they want and they want to do, essentially. So Agile is really good for risk management as well. So if you imagine a waterfall process, you plan everything out, you've got this end target, you do all the work possible. At the end of that, you've released the product, but essentially you're accumulating so much risk because you don't know whether the product's working, whether it's any good. You don't know even whether it's your client or your boss's want, essentially. But with the agile way, you do things in incremental steps, and so you accumulate a heck of a lot less risk. You can adjust course very quickly. So if we had a 2-week sprint as an example, then you can adjust quickly and get feedback and kind of go from there. So there's a thing called the cone of uncertainty. When you first start a project, very few people really know what the project's all about. They haven't really looked into the code that's been briefed from the client or from management. At this point, the margin of error right at the very beginning is between the PMI, Project Managers Institute did some surveys and tests. The very beginning of the project, there's between 60 and 160% inaccuracy in estimations and knowledge, essentially. So it's really, really dangerous. Commonly, this is the point we start quoting right at the very beginning before we really know an awful lot about it. But you pitching an idea to a client or whatever. They know roughly what they want, but this is where we pitch ideas, and potentially you can be out by a long way. The more you go into it, say we're in the middle somewhere, we've done a bit of kind of UX work, we've done some research, we've looked into what the client actually wants. We can start refining their criteria, and as the project goes on through these cycles, so if you imagine here we start actually working in cycles, 2 sprints. Every time we learn a little bit more until we end the project, and we should hopefully have a product that really makes sense to the end users. So with Agile, you focus more on the features rather than kind of the tasks. So you develop an overall model, you build a feature list, you plan by the feature. This is where value poker can come in, and story pointing, which we'll cover shortly. And then you've got a cycle. So commonly in software-based products, you should really be designing as you go. So rather than kind of designing everything right at the very beginning, parts of that process should be kind of designing what's coming next, because you're then agile. If you try and design everything at the beginning, you essentially do partly waterfall. But as you go along, you can change new features. With products with a short lifespan, like in an agency that we work in here, you know what you're building essentially, so you can kind of alleviate and take that out and have that process at the beginning essentially, and have a bit more planning to it. So the value curve, if we look at building features, we can figure out what the client wants as a priority, and then we can end up with a steep value curve. So if we imagine this is time at the bottom and how much value has been added to the product. At the beginning, iteration 0, 0.1 or whatever, we're trying to build the small components, trying to figure out things like logging, all the boring stuff that we have to do every single project. and doesn't really add an awful lot of value. Then as we start getting up, 80% of the project is completed in 20% of the time, essentially. So if we know that these X, Y, and Z features are most important for the client, we start building them first. If we kind of prioritize what's easiest to build and the most valuable to the client, we can hopefully build a curve like this. So that the lines in the middle, essentially, you could potentially release a full product at this stage, and then we're kind of releasing the remaining kind of issues lying at the end. So if you run out of budget, you could cut the project off there. So you've built the vast majority, or you just extend it and just keep reevaluating essentially. But there's a chance here you've got all the valuable bits into the project as soon as possible. Then you've got a product that actually works for the client. You could release much earlier on, so it depends on your value curve and what the client actually wants. One of the projects we're working on upstairs at the minute, we're looking at producing one page in a search, and all that some of the users, that's all they need. So we can build that, get that out to the client. There are a lot more features to the product, but essentially it focuses on a small part that we can actually go out and test. So common Agile artifacts. So a lot of people have probably heard about stories. So as an example, oh for fuck's sake, excuse my language. Okay, give me 5 minutes while this runs in.
Should have used PowerPoint.
Okay, as a admin user, I want to filter my blog posts so that I can get to the one I want. Things like that. So it's really easy for the business to understand. It doesn't get too technical. One of the challenges with this kind of approach is that you end up, the developer gets the stories and they have to interpret what's needed, which is great because it allows you to be a lot more creative, and rather than being told so much implementation detail that, okay, I want this, I want that, I want that. This allows you to be a little bit creative and really kind of makes you focus on the user. One of the challenges when converting to this kind of model is that developers are very good, myself included, at just following the basic steps, what you actually need. With this kind of approach, you need to think about how is it actually going to benefit the user? What can I add to kind of increase their engagement with the application? Do I need X, Y, and Z? Will it help? So it really kind of leaves it up to the team to produce the best solution to solve this problem. So I have got my developer notes somewhere. Let me see if I can get them up. So there's an invest model essentially, which when you're writing user stories or trying to break them down, commonly you'll get a user story that's huge and it's kind of can cover quite a big part of the application. So that we can't work all that on that in one go. So we try and break the stories down and split them up. And it's a whole art. It's really quite difficult in a lot of cases to try and break them up so that you can work on them. But the goal is that they're independent, valuable, estimatable, and what's S? Can't remember what S is. Testable, and something else. I can't remember. But essentially, yeah, lots of kind of different techniques to break them up, and trying to make them independent is the real goal. So you can actually work on them independently. You can then decide if you've got a list of independent stories, you can order them in priority and potentially build half of them but not others. So you're still trying to add the end goal, but this is where kind of building the minimal viable product comes into play, because you could build certain parts of it but not all of it, but you've still got something that works. A checkout is a great example. So you could have a checkout that you can take credit cards, PayPal and Apple Pay as an example, but why not start off with just credit cards? You can get that straight out, you're making money from the system, and then start adding these extra features in as you go along, and you just valuing those as you go. So story and value pointing. So again, if you're familiar with a kind of any Agile framework, commonly you'll use story points. We're doing a lot with value points as well. So the development team will work on story points, which is essentially the complexity of how difficult that task is, and there's lots of other factors to kind of help rank that. Value pointing is essentially pretty much the same thing, but the client does it, and they kind of rate things out and tell you how important it is to them and their business. So when you have that, if we remember that value curve, I'll come on to that actually because I've got that on the next slide. So it's a bit of a kind of fun point. We'll see if we can get this working. I did this morning with a team when we're doing value pointing. It seemed to work. So fingers crossed. If we take these two squares, okay, we've got the really big one on the left hand side. If you in your mind now try and get to the point where you know how many square centimeters or square meters that is essentially. So times x by x or x by y, whatever it might be. Come up with a number. On 3, everybody shout it out. So let me know when you've got a number. Everyone got a number? Have a quick guess. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3.
64.
64. Okay, we had one answer. But essentially, what normally happens in those circumstances is that everybody comes up with something very different. So that's very much like time estimating. It's very difficult to kind of put any kind of real value on time. It's very difficult. There's studies, things like my brain's gone and my notes are gone, but forgive me. There's essentially studies that prove that putting kind of estimates like that just don't work. With story pointing, let's have a look at this as an example. How many of the little square can you fit into the big square? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, so essentially that gives you the answer. We couldn't answer the first one, except Brad. But the second one, it becomes incredibly easy to say, you're comparing one thing against the other, and that's essentially story pointing. So as a team, you get together and you say, this story, we need to do this. What is it? You put an arbitrary figure on it as a starting point, and then work through the rest of them. And you're comparing that. It's that complexity of that first story with the next one you're pointing. And you can see that it's incredibly easy to compare one thing against the other. Human beings are brilliant at it, but we're not very good at kind of very precise measurements. So if we, again, I've touched on this before, so I'll quickly go over the slide. If we've got all the value points for the clients, and we've got how complex and how easy things are for the developers to build, we focus on the value. So essentially we build the things that are really quick and easy, but adds the most value to the product, and essentially we get this value curve. So stand-ups are very common, and it's a great kind of place for everybody to catch up with each other, and generally speaking they should only really be 15 minutes. Commonly a technique that they mention on the Scrum guide is the round robin. So what did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? Is there anything blocking you? I'm not the biggest fan of this approach, because if you imagine you're in a boardroom as an example, or a room, a kind of a business conference, and you're taking it in turns to go around and introduce yourself, you're third or fourth in line, you're waiting for your turn to speak, you're not focusing on what these other people are saying, you think about what you're going to say, and you wait for your turn. So you're not really paying attention to the people in front of you. You say your bit. When you've said your bit, it's going round again, but all you're thinking about, did I say the right thing? Did I mention everything I needed to mention? Was I funny enough? Whatever it might be. So generally you don't really focus, I don't think, on the right things when you're kind of doing the round robin. What we do a lot upstairs as well is kind of focus on walking the board. So with an Agile board, Kanban board, if you use those kind of things, you start on the right hand side and work left. So essentially the things that are on the right hand side are the most valuable. So if everything's ordered in value order, anything to the furthest right is closest to being done and should be essentially most valuable. So you're focusing on the board, who's done this issue, any problems with it, are we ready to go? And the focus goes onto the board rather than the person, so it's a lot more kind of an open way of talking and communicating with each other. And it keeps everybody up to date with what everybody else is doing, rather than just trying to remember what everybody else is doing in the room. You can actually see the tickets, who's assigned to them and where they go. So it's a really nice approach, essentially. Commonly you'll get cycles and sprints as well in Agile frameworks. So the purpose of these, the Scrum guide suggests you shouldn't do any kind of planning or sprinting beyond a month. Commonly you'll get a 2-week sprint or a 2-week cycle. And the reason for that is it gives you that chance to adjust. So you at the end of each cycle, you're supposed to get to a point where you can actually potentially release a product. So if you can build an MVP, it's ready to release, you could potentially release it. It doesn't mean you're going to, but you could potentially release it. That gets reviewed by the client. You can course adjust at that point. So if you're way off track, you've got things completely wrong, this happens much earlier in the project rather than waiting right to the end when you evaluate the entire product as a whole. So it kind of allows you to kind of adjust really easily. With Kanban, it's slightly different. I'm a big fan of Kanban, but there's no kind of set cycle. You can have cycles, but yeah, you can release at any point with Kanban, and it works on certain models, especially the agency model that we work on upstairs. So reviews. This is a great time for the team to show off their work, essentially. So it's great to get the clients and everybody involved in that project together and review what's been done. It's not kind of pointing fingers and blaming, oh, that's not been done, you've not done that right. You get to show off what you've done, and again, essentially, you're making sure you're building the right thing. And it's a great point to celebrate as a team that you're doing really well and everything's going to plan. The client gets involved and they have their say. UX that might not have seen the project, they get to have their say, and everybody can kind of evaluate what's been built, make sure it's effectively meets the acceptance criteria in the user stories. So retrospectives, again, commonly on Scrum, you'd have a review one day and then retrospective presumably on the same day. With Kanban, you can have these at any point as well. So a retrospective, if you're not familiar, is getting a team together that have all been involved and discussing things. What went well, what didn't go well, how can we improve things? And it's a really good point to have open discussions. It could be that communication's broken down, how can we improve it? It could be that a process isn't working, continuous integration keeps going down, let's try and find a solution to that. And it's a really great point to kind of to communicate with the team and learn. So the client's not involved in these meetings, it's all to do with the team and making sure the team are working efficiently together. And that's pretty much it.